Story 1. It's courtesy that shows you're leaving on good terms because employers and employees are not equal. If a company tells you that they're laying you off in 2 weeks, and some do this, there is far more risk to the company than if you say you're leaving in 2 weeks than there is to you. Story 2. Employers pay severance in lieu of notice, for obvious reasons. The Employment Standards Act in Canada provides 1 week of pay for each year of service. Severance pay is compensation that is paid to a qualified employee who has their employment severed. It compensates an employee for losses, such as loss of seniority, that occur when a long-term employee loses their job. Severance pay is not the same as termination pay, which is given in place of the required notice of termination of employment. Termination pay is what it is called when it is paid in lieu of notice. Companies are required to give notice or termination pay in lieu of notice. Also, expecting 2 weeks' notice is not the same as requiring 2 weeks' notice. The law requires the employee to be given notice or pay in lieu of notice and requires no notice on behalf of the employee leaving the company. Story 3. Speaking only of the United States. Practical answer. Asterisk if you quit, they have no chance to train a replacement. It is a move of respect. Typically 2 weeks means someone get as much out of this person's brain as possible. I have given 1 month notices in the past. The respect is so that you don't burn that employment bridge. I have opportunities to join past employers again if I need to, and know plenty of people who have done the same. Basically, it's like leaving a relationship that's currently not working out on good terms. You can stay friends, and there is a possibility of doing it again in the future, maybe. It is not quite a perfect analogy because it's not an all-or-nothing thing. I may have left jobs, but some of my coworkers are now either friends, or I can call on them for help finding work. Asterisk it is usually convenient for everyone. The new company gets to line up their ducks, and you get to train your team for your current job so things can continue. For example, my company has monthly training sessions. That way, they reduce the amount of time every team is doing basic trainings for different aspects of their company, process, technology, tools, security, etc. So someone joining on a random Tuesday is not a good thing for the new company either. Asterisk employers don't give you 2 weeks when firing you because they don't want you working there anymore. There's nothing useful you can provide there. Similarly, you aren't required in the US to give any notice, so you can just leave abruptly. Asterisk employers give severance, which is effectively extra pay to have time to find another job. There are laws where, for example, companies need to give a 3-month notice of layoffs or pay that in severance. I once worked at a company that required a 1-month notice, but they also had a clause that if they were to lay me off, I would receive a 1-month severance. Edit. To clarify, asterisk firing typically refers to for fault termination. You made a mistake. Get out. Asterisk layoff typically refers to company downsizing termination. We ran out of money to pay you, or we don't need this position anymore, regardless of how good of a job you're doing. In both cases, you don't want the employee there because there's a very solid chance they will try to sabotage. Story 4. The only reason to give notice is if you want them to give you a good recommendation if you are going job hunting. And then only if you really trust that they will. Otherwise, and especially if you live in an at-will employment state, there's not really any reason. It's like the belief that employees are not allowed to discuss and compare their compensation. Of course, such a restriction only benefits the employer. It's actually only a custom, long ingrained in most people as forbidden. These all serve employers at the expense of employees. Story 5. It depends on the job. Some jobs specify in both directions the amount of notice that needs to be given. In other jobs, you and your employer can each choose if and how much notice you want to give. Even when it's not required, you and your employer can ask for anything. You just might not get it. The reasons people often choose to give notice include: 1. They falsely think they are required to. They want to end on good terms with their employer so they can use them as a reference. They don't want to burden their coworkers with chaos. The reason employers often don't give notice is that an employee who has nothing to lose, is already fired, or probably resents their employer can be more trouble than they are worth to keep on board. However, some employers do give notice because that employee might be valuable enough that it makes sense to have time for them to train others and transition projects. When I was laid off, my employer gave me 1 year notice. I started looking for a new job in that period and gave them 1 month notice back. Story 6. That's what severance is. You're fired. Here's some money to hold you over. Companies are not required to give severance. Some do, some don't. You don't have to give 2 weeks notice. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. Story 7. The 2 weeks is a courtesy and looks good for you later if you ever need recommendations or whatever. I would not want to work any longer for a company that is going to fire me. Just do it and I will move on. Story 8. Once they have decided to let you go, it is not in their interest to keep you on the premises. There is too much potential for property damage and impact on morale, as well as other things. It is not unreasonable for them to escort you out right away and make an appointment to come back with security to clean out your desk. Story 9. Employers can expect whatever they want. Any company that does not have a track record of paying people for at least a few weeks after they are let go deserves a 0-day notice. Story 10. Because their job isn't to be fair, it's to optimize profits so they can return value to shareholders. A good company will usually pay you a 2-week severance, though. Story 11. They may have leverage over you that you do not have over them. This is because there are comparatively few employers nearby and a large number of potential employees. You may be interested in getting a good referral from them in case you are searching for another employer or would want to go back to them someday. Your future is a bit dependent on their opinion of you in this way. Their future is not so dependent on your opinion of them. Few, if any, prospective employees will ever contact you for a referral about the employer. The other thing is that some people are naive enough to blindly give 2 weeks notice without it being deserved by the employer or in the best interests of the employee. Story 12. Depends on the job and your position. Many companies and higher-level positions offer severance for layoffs. I know most executive positions come with a buyout for termination. Story 13. I've never expected a company to give me notice when they are going to fire me. In the same token, they shouldn't expect me to give them 2 weeks notice. The notion that it is professionalism to give 2 weeks notice is absurd. It only benefits the employer while it hinders the worker from quickly obtaining limited opportunities at other companies. Story 14. It's part of the corporate brainwashing that goes on to make you believe you owe the company your life, your respect, and your dignity for the pleasure of working there. They want you to believe you should put the needs of the company ahead of your own personal life. It's sad so many fall for it and will give up personal vacations, time with their family, miss family functions, and kids' activities for their company. Companies will talk about being all about family, but will guilt you or flat out get mean if you want to take time off you have earned. Then, of course, they will want a 2-week notice while they wouldn't give you a 2-hour notice if they needed to let you go if it means a bump to their bottom line. Check out subreddits like Retirement and read stories about how folks thought they would do their company a solid and give them months of notice before retiring, only to be shown the door or treated poorly as soon as they tried to help the company by giving them plenty of notice. Always do what is best for you first. Never put work or the company ahead of your own life. Story 15. Honestly, if you work in a decent job, you get months of notice before they consider firing you. At least in social services, you have weekly supervision where you discuss issues, then improvement plans, and then larger meetings involving your supervisor and their supervisor to discuss why barriers exist. They even offer transfers to another department if it really isn't working, unless you do something extreme, of course. Story 16. Because you're working for companies that don't care about you, probably because the laws in your country allow them to do just that. Change the law, join a union, and get better employment rights. Story 17. That's why I always made sure I had another job to jump right into, or would work part-time to get my feet wet and ready for full-time, give my 2 weeks notice, and quit before I would get fired for giving my 2 weeks notice. Story 18. They very often require giving 60 days notice depending on the circumstance. And they want a 2-week notice, but you don't have to. You are not legally bound to it, whereas they are. Story 19. They do. Justified termination doesn't require notice on either end. If your employer is breaking labor standards, you have every right to quit on the spot, just as they have every right to let you go if you break policy. No employer with sense is going to let you work for 2 weeks or give severance for 2 weeks when they can easily observe and document a poor-performing employee and terminate them for cause. As an employee, you can do the same thing. If you're being legally mistreated, you can quit for cause and take up the matter of severance with your local labor standards office. The system is fair and equal. It only seems slanted when employees who were dismissed for wrongdoing play the victim, or when employees moving on try to bypass the system due to their own misfortune or lack of due diligence. Story 20. Because you live in a country with non-existent labor protection laws. In most European countries, for example, it absolutely goes both ways. In many cases, the notice period if you get fired is longer than the notice you have to give if you quit. For example, at my current job, if I get fired, I have a 3-month notice period. Sometimes you work those 3 months, sometimes you just get asked to leave and are still paid 3 months of salary. But if I quit, I only have to serve a 1-month notice. The downside is, of course, that you have to serve this notice. If you get a new job, you have to stay at your old job for that month or risk being sued for breach of contract. Absolutely worth it, though, in my opinion. Story 21. It was part of a social contract that began in the 1940s. The idea is that you would give a 2-week notice to quit, and in return, they would give you a 2-week notice before you were let go. Some time ago, most companies stopped giving notice except for executives, and many workers are now let go with no notice at all, simply escorted out and told not to return. However, they have somehow managed to convince most workers that they are required to give notice for some unstated reason. It is a lie. There is no requirement to give any notice at all, just like the employers. Story 22. Practically speaking, a disgruntled employee can cause a lot of damage in those 2 weeks. But it's important to remember there's no need to give notice, only if you expect a reference or recommendation from them in the future. Story 23. I only give one to supervisors or bosses or employers I respect. I built my career enough in my industry that I have zero to worry about when getting a new job. I'll give 2 weeks to a place I enjoyed, grew in, and am simply moving onward from. But if I'm leaving because the employer is absolutely hell to be at and I have simply gotten sick of it, I dump them like a bad girlfriend. A shake of the hand and a goodbye, especially if the same issue has consistently been addressed and never resolved. Always have back pocket offers. Never stop networking. This is hard to do at the beginning of your career, but it's always a great skill and it will take a lot of the stress off you. It's like having a spare car or a spare tire for when things hit the fan. It allows you to also put more focus on doing a good job rather than stressing over how much you can't afford to lose it. Story 24. We did this at one place where I worked. We were all machine operators in a factory. Every year we would hire seasonal staff for our busy season, which lasts 6 to 8 months, and then at the end we would lay them off. They knew this going in. It was part of the job posting and was discussed throughout interviews. As we got close to the end, the boss would warn them about a month out that hours were going to taper and the season was ending. One year, about a week from his last day, a guy set all the workstation desktops/screensavers to inappropriate content and then opened up electrical panels on the machines and ripped hundreds of wires out of the programmable logic controllers and terminal strips. The machines were run on 480 volts, and he could have been killed reaching in there while it was live. I never found out what happened to him, but the police investigated, and I am sure the damage done landed him with a felony charge easily. Never mind the several days of lost production. The seasonal folks never got a warning ever again. They still knew they were seasonal, but one day they would show up to work, and the boss would hand them a check and send them home. Story 25. I know in my job, if I were to give notice, they would just walk me off at that moment. Due to my level of clearance and the access I have to everything, they would still pay me my 2 weeks, but they know if I were disgruntled, I could do some damage. Story 26. The only reason to give notice is if you want them to give you a good recommendation if you are going job hunting. And then only if you really trust that they will. Otherwise, and especially if you live in an at-will employment state, there is not really any reason. Story 27. That's an American thing and maybe also other countries. If I get fired, I have a notice period of anywhere from 1 to 6 months, depending on how long I've been with the company. More than 5 months of employment. 1 month notice. 5 months to 2 years and 9 months of employment. 3 months notice. 2 years and 10 months to 5 years and 8 months of employment. 4 months notice. 5 years and 9 months to 8 years and 7 months of employment. 5 months notice. After 8 years and 7 months of employment, you have 6 months notice. And after 12 to 17 years, depending on the industry, you also have a mandatory severance package.